Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm sure, like many of you, it is our favorite month of the year, October, so I'm excited to post some spooky videos for you all. This video that I'm filming right now, I'm not exaggerating, I've been looking forward to filming for an entire year because, as many of you know, I've reviewed it here before, The Haunting of Hill House is it's my favorite TV show of all time. 10 out of 10. Horror masterpiece. If you're watching this and somehow you haven't seen it, I don't understand you, but I'm also jealous of you because you get to experience it for the first time. So needless to say, I had very high expectations going into The Haunting of Bly Manor. The first part of this video will have no spoilers, and then we'll have a spoiler discussion at the end when you get to this timestamp, just FYI. And I also would recommend, since I am talking about spoilers at the end, I wouldn't recommend looking down at the comments because people will probably be discussing the show and there'll probably be spoilers there. As always, I'm going to start off with a high-level overview, then I'll get to pros and cons, and then again at the end of that, then I'll get into spoilers. So for a high-level summary, just for some background and context about Haunting of Bly Manor, some people are viewing this as Haunting of Hill House Season 2, but really I think it's important to view this as its own sort of separate entity. In a way, it's sort of an anthology series in the same way that American Horror Story is, in that it has some of the same cast, but it's an entirely different storyline with new characters. The biggest difference between this and American Horror Story, though, I would say, is that American Horror Story has been trashed since Season 3. But for a high-level overview, our protagonist is Danny Clayton, so very excited that Victoria Pendretti is back, and this is all very loosely based on the classic The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. So we have a young governess, again played by Danny, who is tasked with taking care of two little siblings, a brother and a sister, at a very remote mansion in England, and not surprisingly, some spooky things start happening. First, starting off with the pros, not surprisingly, I was already saying how much I love Victoria Pendretti, and the acting across the board I thought was incredibly strong. I really adored and really cared about all of these characters as individuals, even though some of the accents were a little bit jarring. Henry's, even though I don't know if it's accurate or not, it sort of sounded maybe a little bit like a stereotype, I did think was fun. But again, I think for pros, the acting again is beautiful and wonderful. The cinematography, it looks stunning. Each episode feels like its own feature-length film, and the colors and the way it's shot, I wanted to keep screenshotting images because I wanted to make them my desktop background because I thought they were all just across the board so beautiful in sort of a haunting way. Again, I'm not going to get into spoilers, but similar to Haunting of Hill House, a lot of the episodes focus on different characters' backstories, one episode at a time. And I will just say, again, no spoilers, Mrs. Gross's episode, she's the housekeeper, the caretaker of the home, is by far my favorite. I thought it was the most interesting, intriguing, and engrossing. And what I did like about Haunting of Bly Manor, similar kind of to Haunting of Hill House, is that Haunting of Hill House was a story about family that happened to have horror elements, and this also is sort of a take on the horror genre. Not too much, I'll get into that in the cons, but I liked that this really was a story about love, whether it's a beautiful, very loving relationship, whether it's an abusive relationship, whether it's an unrequited relationship that we all wish would have happened. So it really explores love in really beautiful ways. Overall, those are my pros, and let's get into the cons. I want to say up front, and first I apologize if you can hear the birds and everything like that, but it's hot in my apartment and my apartment building has shut off the AC. I'm worried as I talk about the cons, it's really going to come across as if I didn't like this series, but I think it's important to keep in mind two things. Number one, as I said, Haunting of Hill House is my favorite TV show of all time. And number two, and I don't actually think I should have done this in retrospect, I rewatched The Haunting of Hill House right before this came out just because I was so excited. I thought, what a perfect time in anticipation to rewatch The Haunting of Hill House. And looking back, I really wish I would not have done that because it's impossible for me in the back of my head and as I was watching the show to not stop comparing the two. When again, it's a completely new cast of characters. Mike Flanagan he directed all of Haunting of Hill House, I think, don't quote me on that. And I think that he only directed one of the episodes in this show. So again, although it's along the sort of same theme and it's sort of an anthology series, I really need to stop comparing them, but inevitably I'm going to, and I'm sure you guys are too. So that said, getting into the cons, I did not find this remotely scary. All I'll say is, you know, they're the creepy sort of ghosts that are in the background of this in the same way that they're in the background of Haunting of Hill House did not disturb me whatsoever. But I thought Haunting of Hill House did such a good job of, even though there were a few jump scares, it really built up a huge sense of dread and fear and tension, especially looking at the past versus present. And I think, for me at least, in The Haunting of Bly Manor, what was really missing for me was that sense of tension. They also go forward and backward in time. I don't think this is a spoiler for me to say. You find out in episode 1, the previous nanny is dead, so you're going forward and backward in time to Danny and with other characters as well, trying to see what happened. And this other nanny, Rebecca, is lovely. I'm very sad she's dead, but it just didn't build up that same sense of dread that season 1 did. And I know a lot of people might say, well, you know, this is a story about relationships just in the same way that season 1 was a story about family. It's not going to be as scary. I would argue that season 1 was a story about family that was also incredibly terrifying. It has haunting in the title, it's marketed as horror, but this was a story about relationships that happened to have some ghosts in the background standing there awkwardly. But on top of that, I thought quite a few of the episodes were incredibly slow. Miles, the little boy, who, as a side note, I thought he was a very, very good actor. I was really impressed. But his episode with his backstory in the school, I don't care. And I know a lot of people might say, well, if you go back and rewatch it, once you know everything that happens throughout the story, it'll be a lot more interesting. I personally don't agree, and I actually don't think I'm probably going to rewatch this down the road. In addition to the pacing being all over the place, I also thought that the storytelling was a little bit too on the nose and a little bit too repetitive. And I know that this deals with time, that's a major theme, but I still think it was too repetitive, and I can't say what twists I thought were too on the nose. I'm sure if you've seen the show, you can guess what I'm talking about, but there was never a single moment where I thought, oh, haha. It was just, it all, you kind of were able to anticipate it in advance because, again, I'll talk about this in the spoilers, sometimes they just flat out told you the twists in previous episodes. So overall, I know I just ragged on it for a while. Again, I do think the acting, the cinematography are wonderful. I just think the storytelling, in my opinion, was much, much weaker in this season. So overall, I would probably give The Haunting of Bly Manor a 7 out of 10. So if you haven't watched the show and you don't want to be spoiled, again, make sure to exit out right now because I'm just going to get into some spoilers. So when I said that the story was too on the nose, what I'm talking about is there's a scene where, even just as a random example, Flora says, oh, just imagine, I was going to do a British accent, but I won't. Or she says, oh, just imagine if some of us were ghosts and we didn't even realize it. And at that point, because they had already given so many hints, I thought, okay, at this point, no one can be a ghost without realizing it because they've made it so obvious. So then when the reveal happens with Mrs. Gross, there is no sense of, aha, I thought, okay, I'm aware of this because you've told us and beaten it over our head about 10 different times. I was so happy to see Katie Siegel back. I thought that episode was really fun, if not a little bit drawn out in my opinion, but it was still very good, and I like that we got her backstory. I also just really wonder if Mike Flanagan, and I'm kidding when I say this, just really wants Victoria Pendretti to suffer at the end of every single season. I was so happy that her and Jamie at least got 13 years together. That made me very, very happy. But I don't think any of us were surprised, especially when we saw how happy they were together and then we saw, oh, there's 30 minutes left. Clearly something horrific is gonna happen. So those are all my thoughts, including spoilers. Maybe a few months from now, I'll feel a little bit differently. Again, it's a good, solid show. I would recommend it 7 out of 10, but just as someone who's a super fan of Haunting of Hill House, I was a little bit let down, and I feel terrible for saying that because I'm sure Mike Flanagan and the creators and the cast, I'm sure they're all aware that people like me, you know, I'm sure their fear is that people like me are going to be like, oh, it doesn't live up to season 1. So I feel bad saying that in some ways, but it's just how I feel. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please let me know if you've seen it. What are your thoughts down below? What did you enjoy about it? What did you not enjoy? What made sense? What didn't? How did it compare to Haunting of Hill House? Hope you all are having a wonderful October so far, all things considered, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.